Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to After Service. It is our podcast for Open
It
Door Community
is. I'm
Church.
I'm Pastor Brian, and this is Pastor Joe, and we're so glad you joined us. And it feels like it's been a long time since we've gotten together and had a podcast.
Well, it has, because we didn't do it for a couple. Hello, Milo. We
No,
didn't
it's
do it
been a
for.
year.
It was last year. It was last year. Yeah, It was December
Couple
because
weeks.
I was gone for a few weeks, or I was in Texas. We had the holidays, and then you had the family stuff last week.
I had the family thing last week, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's just been one thing after another. But that's life, right?
It is life, and I'm grateful to you, and perhaps that reflects back to me as well that we can pick right back up, and that it doesn't feel it doesn't feel like an obligation. It's just an opportunity, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I love hanging out with you and just talking about life and about spiritual stuff. And yeah, you're one of my best friends. So I'm so glad to be able to have this time.
Aren't our congregation lucky to have us?
I was just told that actually, I think it was Sunday, on how much they just love our interaction. You know, they do. And so, yeah.
It's a
Okay.
There's maybe a little stand-up routine in there, but no, it's just nice. It's nice to be comfortable enough with somebody that you don't feel like you're putting on a show. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know,
Right.
when people
Exactly,
see us
which we don't.
interact and there's no camera on and it's not during the service, doesn't really change.
No. What you see is what you get.
Yeah, it's really nice. What
It
you been
is.
doing this week, by the way?
Monday, I just did work around the house, you know, laundry, cleaning, dishes, that sort of stuff. Usually over the weekend, things kind of get behind because we're so busy on the weekends. Tuesday, I did nothing. I sat on the couch all day and watched TV. It was weird. I don't normally do nothing. Yesterday, Jack had a wrestling match, and you know he won that, which was great. Other than that, went back to work, starting on the new series that we're going to be starting on Sunday on Ephesians. But other than that, nothing really. You?
Nothing, nothing really. I mean, I'm working. You know,
Yeah, normal life stuff.
I have a job, and you know, Wednesday nights is disc golf league night,
Right?
and that's just nice. You get out, it rains on you, it's muddy, you're just chatting with people and walking around. You know,
I love that you have that bonding time with Sam.
Well, he and I don't get to play together.
Well, but you still have
I know
a
what you mean.
mutual interest.
Yeah, yeah. When he comes home from school or whatever, sometimes he'll text me and say, "Hey, come pick me up. We'll go over to Memorial in Wilsonville, or we'll, you know, practice putting in the backyard or something like that." It's something that
Yeah.
I feel really blessed that we get that time together because you know he's at an age where that transition starts to happen.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true.
Well, give us the rundown on the message on Sunday.
It was part two of a two-part thing on worship. I can kind of give us a summary of all of it because we didn't talk last week. I talked about in this series that worship is a response to redemption, that's what we are called to be. It is the fundamental thing that we're supposed to do as God's creatures and particularly as believers, that worship really is the foundational thing. And it is supposed to be the response. And I'm walking through verses for all of these things. And then I talked about how, well, what is it though? And that's more what I focused this week. And that was about that it involves all that we are as a human being. So it involves our minds, our emotions, our bodies. The minds is that, you know, because empty-headed worship is not good. I mean, truth matters.
Yeah.
We act on what we act on because of what we think. How we think matters. And so we need to have good lyrics. We need to know our Bibles. We need to really need to think. And that thinking, that truth ought to have ought to stir our passions. I mean, I suppose that's a little. I think I use that word instead of emotions, even though emotions is what I use, because it's a little bit deeper than that. It's you should be moved, because the demons know these truths too, but they're moved in a different way. They're moved in to rejection and fear and anger, and we should be in rejoicing and thankfulness and love and appreciation. And if that's not happening, then maybe there's some sin of idolatry there, because we are, as Christians, I mean, as human beings, designed to worship. That's what we do, and so worship is a rejection of idolatry. I briefly talked about that, and there's a lot of things we can worship. It's anything that we substitute for God, and that can be our own emotions, or it could be ourselves, our own. Besides the standard stuff of what people think and what money and power and all that sort of stuff. And then I finally said, and then it's worship is to be expressed physically. If your head is engaged and you're moved with your mind and your heart and your passions, the body just follows along. It should. That's a natural progression. Again, if there's, just like with the emotions, if there's something not happening, why isn't there? There's a break somewhere. And in the worship service, we're called to worship, as we walk through briefly some psalms, standing and kneeling and clapping and dancing and all kinds of physical displays, that there should be some kind, even if it's just a smile. And that's normal when we're excited about something as a human being. Whether our child wins an event, we get excited and we stand up and we pump our fist, or we clap, or we do something physically. And then but it's beyond just what happens in the worship service. Worship, the same word is in the Old Testament, is also what is translated service. So we need to serve people. We need to love people. To love, if you're going to love God, you got to love people. You can't separate the two. And so I kind of ended with, if worship, with your mind, with your heart, your soul, just by rejecting idolatry and loving people and the most critical thing to do is to tell them about Jesus, which also declares his glory. So that's a long-winded thing, but that's in the nutshell. That's what I said. So,
well, a few things come to mind. The first thing I want to mention is somebody came up after the service to chat with me about, I shared during the service kind of my experience growing up. Most people are aware, if you've been listening for a while, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I didn't become a worship leader until I was in my mid-30s, and I didn't know what a worship leader was.
right.
And so there's this thing that's kind of occurred where in kind of our modern church vernacular, worship is equated with a time during the service when there is music and singing.
Right. And that's it.
Yeah. And that's not how I thought about it. So one thing I had mentioned was I didn't worship in the Catholic Church, which this person interpreted as that the Catholic Mass wasn't worshipful, which it is in the sense that we're talking about in that, right? But I didn't think about it when I went to college and they referred to the music and stuff as worship. I'm like, I don't know why. Why is this designated only as worship, but the rest of the stuff isn't? There was something that didn't line up for me, and I'm kind of grateful for the fact that, say what you will about Catholicism and challenges with the doctrine, but if you engage with it, it's very worshipful. It's very, but then at the same time, the other piece of that, well, first of all, do you have any comments
No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. Worship is much broader than just that. And it's a tragedy that we think of that as that. And even 2 weeks ago, when I brought it up in the service, there's a person afterward and says, now, are you only talking about just what we do here on Sunday morning and singing? Because I have a problem with that. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And you'll see it next week. Yeah.
The other thing that you talked about was just kind of that physical response to worship. And I was, my immediate thought, and you mentioned it, is responding almost involuntarily to your child doing well in something. And I thought about Sam played a lacrosse game last year. It was, I think, his last regular season game. He hadn't scored a goal, and in this particular game, he scored a goal, and it was just beautiful. He grabbed this pass and shot it, and I could not help myself. I mean, other parents or kids, they're making goals. That's really not generally what Sam's role is. But you kind of want something like that to happen.
It was you had an involuntary response.
I
wasn't
slapped
thought,
my
wasn't
hands,
conscious. It just happened.
Slapped my hands. I went woo, and then so there was that physical, there was a verbal, and then the emotional. I mean, there was all kinds of emotions. There was excitement. There was like when your boys do something remarkable, there's almost the emotional response is like almost like a gratefulness that leads to tears.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It can for some people, definitely. Yeah.
So I think about you've talked about like rooting on your favorite sports team and stuff, but even that's can be kind of surface level. But when you think about somebody that you really love and who you're really invested in, I wish that we all felt that way about the way that we worship, whether it's with music or in our daily lives. That that's something I think to pray for, to be convicted of. That are any of us really truly responding? Is our worship that kind of full-bodied, passionate response,
Right.
And founded on doctrine and the truth of the gospel and all of that. So it's, again, not empty-headed emotionalism. It's, I have the foundation of my faith, and then it is expressed in this passionate way.
Right. And I use sports because it's so common, but I mean, even if you just think about the birth of a child, your grandchild, or, any time that something happens that triggers you emotionally, really does, there is always, I don't know, maybe always a physical response, even if it's subtle, even if it's just a smile. It just, there's something you can see it on someone's face when they get right. Why is it? And so that's why isn't, this is the question I ask myself, is why not? Why do we not? I mean, once we grasp the idea that this is what we're supposed to be doing, because of what Jesus did, because of who God is, that full-throated, meaty understanding of that should trigger deep, our heart should be moved. I think about 2 Corinthians 5:14, Christ's love compels us, moves us, and then we should live a certain way because of it. It should be expressed physically. Why don't we? Is there, and that's why I thought about the idolatry. Do we worship worrying about what other people think, and that's why we don't really give ourselves to what happens on Sunday morning. And although Sunday morning is not the whole picture, but I have often thought about what we do Sunday morning as kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A condensed model, an archetype for the rest of the Christian life. There's fellowship, there's work, there's prayer, there's declaring God. I mean, there's all of the elements should be there. And so if you can't truly express your faith there, are you ever going to? So I don't know.
It's something I very much I thought a lot about, even when you were describing it. What prohibits us from engaging in worship? And you mentioned, one barrier, which is the, self-consciousness. How are people going to respond to me if I really kind of relax in and allow my my natural tendencies to come out? When there's been times when I've gone for a run, like when I did Hood to Coast, the sun would come up in the middle of my run, or I'd peak a mountain or something like that. And I start to laugh and I put my hands up and I pray, because it feels like a very natural thing to do in
Right.
that moment. I do think that culturally, a lot of people, I think our generation may be one of the last ones. It was part of the, subdued, don't be demonstrative, it's disrespectful. We conduct ourselves a certain way in church, and you dress a certain way in church, and you don't act out. I'll put that in quotes. And I think that's part of what can stop us. And I will tell you that I also get a little anxious when I get around people who are overly demonstrative,
Right. It can go both ways.
because I don't know if it's real. Right? How much of that
Is for show.
is
and-
for show. And, I know, when I listen to a 9-minute worship song, there's a little bit of like, how much of this is you trying to demonstrate to me how worshipful you are versus you being in that moment? You know what I mean?
like the one I sent you today.
Right. And there's a very cynical part of me that
Sure.
that believes that, and because it's true, there's a certain
Absolutely.
part of that's true, but I've been around people who really just engaged in worship in a such a deep and passionate and unbridled way that it's kind of inspiring. Where you're like, wow, I wish that I could let go like that,
And I think I had two thoughts. One is one is a question, and the other one is just this idea of the. I think we need to get to the place in all of our life where we're self-forgetful in the sense that it's about us at all, to where we're focused on other people, not in the sense of caring what they think about us, because that's still about us, but serving them, loving them, caring about them, and thinking about God, because you can't separate the two. You can, but you can't. That kind of fully outward focus, but not outward focus as in caring about what they think, how they're looking at me. So I would love to be able to get to that place, that self-forgetful place. The other one thought I had, because you talked about respectful, was, but what is respectful? Because you could dress nice and still not be respectful.
That's right.
Towards God.
Yeah.
You could dress, in dirty, nasty clothes and be more respectful to God. I don't know. That's an interesting. Do you have any thoughts about that? Because
Sure.
that's really kind of what I was thinking about with your thoughts with that.
Well, one thing that's been on my mind quite a bit of late is the idea that we project our human expectations upon God's response or how he receives things. So when we talk about respectful, we're really talking about human cultural norms, right? Like, and we're talking about distraction, perhaps. Remember, we had all those conversations years ago about distraction, and
Right.
there's two parts to that. There's the person who is causing a distraction. There's a person who interprets that other person's actions as a distraction, and we have a role in kind of ensuring that we're not forcing our own cultural expectations on God. Is he, and Jesus talks about this all over the place. Like, yeah, you guys think you have to live a certain specific way, and we're going to create new amazing rules just to ensure we don't get out of sync with God. And in the meantime, God's over here, Jesus is over here, like inviting himself to dinner with tax collectors or whatever. I think we really get wrapped up in our very limited human perspective and try to apply it to who we think God is. And we don't get it right, and we never will.
Right.
That's the wonderful messiness of humanity. But I think that's what grace is about, and trying to take what Jesus' sacrifice was as a model for us, demonstrating grace to other people.
And is it a distraction, or is it an encouragement? It depends on how you take it. You
Right.
see somebody raising their eyes and weeping. Is that a distraction? Well, in a sense, yes, it is. In a sense, yes, it is, because it'll pull your attention there. But it could also be I need to worship. It could be an encouragement to enter into more deeply and free you to be willing to be not worrying about you, because they're not worrying about you at all in that moment. They're worrying about themselves. They're thinking about God. And so, and that all has to do with your perspective on things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
and
you've
I
heard
think
me
go
say that, like, professionally, I like to know that there is somebody on a team that I'm working with that pushes boundaries and makes other people uncomfortable with the boundaries that they're pushing, because it leaves more space for people to be normal, right? Like, ooh, Carl is way out there. What is he doing? Well, somebody else is doing something that might otherwise think is a little off-putting or different, but compared to Carl,
Right.
they're fine.
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity to push the boundaries of
Right.
norms. And I didn't say this very well on Sunday, but I'll try to explain it a bit. As an actor, when you're performing, there's got to be some underlying, like, pure, real emotion to what you're doing. But if you allow that to overtake what you're doing, you actually take away from what
yeah.
people are receiving, right? You are so vested in the reality of that you're creating through that character that you leave people behind. And so, from a leadership perspective, I have to kind of measure how I engage, because I don't want that to be a distraction, or to take people out of, or to make it about me and my experience, and not giving people a safe place to worship, a safe place to engage, a safe place to just consider their life with Christ and where that fits in. And so, as we talk about wanting to encourage people to engage in worship in everything that they do, and to not put a governor on themselves, there's also a sense of, as you pointed out, caring enough for our neighbor that as we are engaging in an authentic way, that we're not preventing or making it difficult for somebody else to engage in worship. That's long-winded, so.
Right. Yeah. But I agree. It wasn't that long-winded. I mean, see, there's the two outliers on both sides. There's the what did you call him, Craig or whatever? What is Carl that is so demonstrative that you can be more demonstrative, and that's okay. But see, there's the other side of it too, where you can have someone who's so stoic that it can pull everybody down. And so one of the things to think about is, if you struggle with this stuff, are you, by not being even a little bit more demonstrative, preventing other people from being demonstrative and entering it? Because you can be a wet blanket to it as well. But both in worship, again, all of this is worship, but also how you live your faith out loud as well.
Yeah. I had a conversation with somebody after church on a very similar topic, where they were having trouble engaging with the modern songs that we're doing. And I talked about one of the first sermons that I attended at Open Door, back when it had a different name, where you talked about worship and how, certain people have a great affection for hymns and some of the older songs, and some people really want to hear the newer songs, and we have to realize that something that you love is a wet blanket for somebody else. And that, certain songs are going to be more meaningful to you. It's just part of the way that we grow up and we develop, and the familiarity and the nostalgia and all that kind of stuff. And I have to acknowledge that there are certain songs that I lead that I don't care that much about. And I'll give you an example only because I feel like it's fairly safe. And that is How Great Is Our God by, the Chris Tomlin song. It's okay. It doesn't do much for me.
It's a very vanilla song.
Right. But I remember I mentioned that I didn't really care that much for it in kind of an open venue, and somebody got really offended because they're like, "Oh, I love that song." And that was a good lesson to me, where it's like, you know what? It may not be my song, but I still get to offer that. There's a little self-sacrifice in worship, right? So, right, I'm going to give up a little bit because I want to make an environment where we can all be safe and comfortable and engage.
Well, and this is what I'm thinking with that. There's something I don't know that I've said very often or at all publicly, but my thought is, yes, a lot of our songs are not super theologically rich. They're not. They're very emotive. A lot of them are. And I'm okay with that because my thought process is I provide in the sermon the meat, and the songs help you grasp how to respond to it. This is leading you into the emotional piece, the passion piece. Take what the truth that you have. And so for those who like, even for you, like, How Great Is Our God is not that great. So the song isn't. But use your mind to think about how great is our God. Okay? Engage your mind this way. Engage your mind in other things, and then let the songs be something that helps you move to the worship piece. Because you just so the lyrics aren't everything you need. That's okay.
Right.
I think that's asking too much of every song. I think that's asking way too much of every song.
One thing that I try to do, and that at least it's useful to me, is when when we're doing a song, we're singing a song together, I look for a lyric that affects me maybe differently than it did before, or is particularly meaningful. And it's like, oh, okay, Elton John has played your song, tens of thousands of times, and for me that would seem like a cause for despair. Like, oh gosh, how do you just not go crazy? But it's like you're always looking for something new or different, or to interpret a different way.
Right.
And some of our like Amazing Grace, we know that so well that we have ceased in many ways to connect with the message. Right. It's like row, row, row your boat. It just comes out and you don't think about it.
So you need to engage your mind, and maybe I do need to say this, you guys need to be engaging your mind during the worship service. And if it's not a song where maybe the lyrics aren't as rich as you would like, or maybe maybe you just need to add some more of your theology that in your own head to help you feel the richness of what's being said here. Because we have some songs, your love never fails and never gives up. I mean, good Lord, that there's not much, the song isn't saying much.
Yeah.
It just isn't. Okay. Well, then think about why the passion in that song. Okay. And maybe you need to stop singing a minute and think about it.
Yeah.
Because that'll help.
Yeah,
I don't know.
100%.
Nevertheless, we do need to, as you pointed out at the beginning, songs are emotional. And some people, they have deep emotions to various songs. And so we do try to spread them out. But yeah, try to engage your mind. Yeah, it has to, worship is a response to revelation in redemption. So think about that stuff. Anyways, so much to talk about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Joe. You do, and I'll say this, and we can end with this, is because the thing I love about how you worship is you really do lead us into worship, and everybody thinks that. You know,
That's awesome.
You definitely do not put on a show. Once in a while people joke about the Joe and Brian show or the Joe show. Well, yes, but that's more of just saying because we would love to have more musicians up there, which we wouldn't we all? But they're not saying that because they think it's a performance. Nobody thinks it's a performance by you. No one thinks you. I also want to say I don't think I've ever heard someone say, "Joe, you got too emotional today." Ever.
I don't think I've heard that either.
You've never got, and whenever you do show your emotions, it really hits people really deep. So thank you for sharing that stuff because I know you don't like to sometimes. So.
Well, thanks for sharing that with me.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, this has been well. You go ahead. You take us out. It's been a
I'm gonna
production
go
of
eat
Open Door
dinner, people.
Communications.
Yeah. After service is a presentation of Open Door Community Church. Yeah. Anyway, guys, have a great week. We're going to see you on Sunday. So make sure that if you can't be there in person, that you find us on your favorite social media platform. And we're just grateful that you take the time to listen, give us an opportunity to chat and dig into things a little deeper. And we're just grateful for you. Love you. Can't wait to see you soon.
Take care.
Take care.